everyone. Thank you so much. And for all the attendees who were part of this, appreciate it. We are talking about EdTech and equity in DFW schools today. Obviously, it's an issue not just in DFW, but so anyone watching outside of DFW, still relevant material. Wanted to go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves first instead of me sort of mangling that. I'll have you do it yourselves. Nicolina, if you want to start.
Sure. But how would you like me to introduce myself?
Say who you are, what you do, any kind of background you want to give, like a 2 minute, 2 minutes, just a general.
All right, no problem. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. I am Nicolina, and I am a product and program management lead at Google for Education. I've worked in the education space in a variety of roles for upwards of 15 years, everything from international education to teaching in the classroom, both at the high school and graduate level. Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled to be here today. A little bit about myself. I'm a mother of 2 daughters. I am based in my daughter's nursery, which formerly known as a nursery and a guest room, and reconstrued to a nursery and an office. So there you have it.
Great.
Nice.
Very common these days. Yeah. Andrew, how about you? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rilla, and thank you all for having me. My name is Andrew Hodge. I work for the Texas Education Agency, and the Texas Education Agency in Texas is our Department of Education, as you would think about it in most states. So we are a part of the executive branch of the state of Texas government, and we oversee 1,200 school districts in Texas, which include charters and public school districts. 5.4 million kids, so quite a few kids. It's about 10% of the K-12 population of the entire country. And obviously quite a few of those students are based in DFW area. Also, my home area is the Metroplex as well. I'm from Carrollton. So very, very excited to be here having this very critical discussion. At TEA, I'm the Director of Innovative Instructional Models, which support and build in systems for districts to rethink how they spend time within schools. So whether that's rethinking time within the classroom through blended learning. So that's where a lot of our technology programs come in, trying to really equip teachers and equip leaders and parents and students to be able to use technology effectively to best meet their needs. Also, we think a lot about expanding the school day through our 21st Century Community Learning Center grant. So that's out of school time, before school, after school, summer school. And then in addition to that, the state of Texas in our previous legislative session enabled districts to get funded for actually expanding the school year. So for an additional 30 days beyond the typical 180-day calendar year, the state of Texas pays school to go longer and to decrease the summer slide that a lot of our students face. So again, happy to be here, excited to talk through technology with such a critical lens, which is equity.
Great. Nicholas.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hey, everybody. Again, just really thankful, like Andrew said, to be here. And I hope that this finds you all and your families happy, healthy, and well during this unprecedented time. I know that, we're getting some good news with this vaccine, but it's a tough time and we have a dark winter ahead. Just so wishing you guys all well, wherever you are. So my name is Nicholas Pascal. I'm originally from Queens, New York. My beautiful wife, Naz, helped me to find the beauty in Dallas, Texas. She's from here originally. And so we came here about 3.5 years ago to grow our family. I'm just going to put it out there crazy. We found out yesterday that my wife is pregnant with a baby boy.
Oh, congratulations.
So thank you. Yeah, it's been a long journey, IVF, stuff like that, but could not be more happy. I'm kind of all cried out at this point, just tears of joy. So really excited to be here. I am a 17-year educator. I was a special ed teacher. I was a history teacher, middle school, high school. I was a high school principal, middle school principal. I'm mainly focused on turnaround work. So I turned around a school in Philly. I did a turnaround here for Uplift Education in Fort Worth and Stop 6, which Andrew is probably familiar with. And I now work as the director of social emotional learning for our network. Uplift has 23,000 students from Deep Ellum, which is like a hip part of the city, like downtown Dallas, to all the way to White Settlement, which is a little bit past Fort Worth. So yeah, just very, very excited to be here and talk about, all things ed. I can't believe it's been 17 years already, and excited to learn from everybody here.
Great. Brittany, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brittany Chang. I am a first-year fourth grade teacher here in Dallas. I'm part of a teacher prep kind of program. So technically this is my second year teaching. Last year I worked as a resident. So I basically just like shadowed and observed another fourth grade teacher and a kindergarten teacher. At the same time, I am currently pursuing my master's degree from Johns Hopkins. So I will be graduating this April, May, one of those months, with my master's in education. And then I also recently graduated, I guess, from undergrad to get my bachelor's in education sciences with a specialization in children's learning and development. And then right now I'm teaching fully virtually online with fourth graders. I have a lot of students. And so EdTech and equity with EdTech, especially working at a Title I school, has been just very relevant and very interesting to just learn about and navigate firsthand this school year. So I'm really excited to talk with all of you and get to learn just more about all the different perspectives on equity and educational technology at our schools.
Thank you. And Crystal, glad you could make it in there through the firewall. Thank you. We're just introducing ourselves real briefly.
Really appropriate on the equity in our schools, and that there's too many people streaming. So I had to get my personal hotspot out in the district to get this to work. My name is Crystal Rentz, and I currently work in Duncanville ISD. I've been in education over 20 years. I'm the director of innovation here. I've been a variety of things. And Nicholas, I feel for you. I have 2 IVF babies, a 6 and a 4-year-old, told we'd never have kids, and they're amazing. We are old parents. But yeah, so I have little ones, and I have a different perspective because I've been an educator, I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator, I've worked in 8 districts. Prior to here, I worked in Dallas. I was over all of the summer and after school programming. So I've always been about equity and access. And so I'm director of innovation now, but I'll be real honest with you, my role is very much other duties as assigned, right? We have our choice programs, but I'm not trying to build a new choice program next year. So I've been doing a lot of stopgap work in between. We don't have a lot of IT specialists outside of just who's working in IT, and they're working 24/7 to get devices out. So I've had to kind of step in, build a dashboard for COVID, build a dashboard for but I also have a 6-year-old who was in the second half of kindergarten last year and had some reading issues, right? Because she was at home and I'm working 24/7. And then I have a child that has special needs. So I also see that lens when we're doing at home learning only, right? What does that look like? And so, yeah, that's kind of my background. I'm really passionate about equity, and this is a very much needed conversation, especially because I'm in a district that we couldn't get one-to-one. Even if we wanted to, we've got thousands of devices waiting on hold, and our goal is to get 1 per household. And so we're struggling with that whole, how do we get 6 kids on 1 device synchronous? So yeah, I think this is such a needed conversation. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Charlotte Danielson. I am an attorney, actually, have been for the last 22 years, and I've done a lot of work helping entrepreneurs, startup companies and other companies come into the U.S. And working with local companies here as well. And some of those have been EdTech companies, and I've done a lot of speaking internationally and seen a lot of different school systems across the world. And one of the most common things with companies when I see cool technology in other places, they're like, well, we're not really sure what the US needs. We have these great products. There's kind of a disconnect. And after I started hearing that internationally, I kind of started asking the EdTech founders in the US, same issue, same question. There seems to be a little bit of silos happening, and they're developing products in sort of the abstract for what they think is needed. So part of this came up really because I wanted to get the information out there on what really is needed from the school's perspective. That's something that entrepreneurs would find very interesting. Also, from just a personal perspective, education has always just been very fascinating to me. I came to the U.S. as an immigrant, started kindergarten with no English, no ESL classes or anything. They just stuck me in kindergarten. At one of the, started off in the worst school probably in California, the very lowest level. Got to see how those schools operated, managed to transfer myself out into during high school because there was already gang activity and really uncomfortable, and the school I was slated to go to was really bad. And then went to the other extreme of public education, where it was one of the best high schools in the area, and then ended up going to Berkeley for college, and then Stanford for law school. So where I started in kindergarten and where I ended out is something that's not sort of the normal path taken, and anything that involves improving education, and especially for the lower end of education, where we see so many deficiencies and so many more needs, is something that just personally has always interested me. So that's why you're all here, because I wanted to do this and I thought it was just an interesting topic. So wanted to start off, don't know very much about Dallas in particular, so I want to start off maybe Brittany, since you've been teaching as a fourth grade teacher in a school where over 94% of the students are classified as economically disadvantaged. 64% are English language learners. What are the biggest issues that you and your colleagues are facing in integrating the technology that you're using in the classroom? And even though you're on the sort of less experienced side of it, the reality has been sort of that you've been very much targeted for virtual learning because you get the EdTech more than the teachers who have been there for 20 years. And so I know that you've been innovating a lot and doing things through what you've been doing. So I want to set the scene.
So honestly, the list of things that are challenging feels like it's never ending at this point. Coming into my first year of teaching with all of this happening has been very overwhelming, but at the same time, it's been really cool to see how much my students have grown in just learning how to navigate educational technology and how fast they can pick it all up. But the biggest issue that we are facing, or that we have faced, I guess, throughout, is just the lack of equitable access to internet connection, kind of like you mentioned, Crystal. So students are coming to class on Zoom trying to participate, but the second that they take themselves off of mute or they do anything else on their computers, they're automatically kicked off the call, or we can't hear them, or there's that weird lag where they mute themselves and then the sound keeps happening. So we're facing that issue a lot, and students aren't getting to have their voices heard out loud, which is hard because as fourth graders, we want to help them develop those speaking skills. At the same time, since they are at home when they're learning, there are a lot of distractions, and coming from the households that they are in, they have a lot of my students have younger siblings that they're taking care of. They have parents that are working full-time jobs, and they don't have the support that other students in schools have. And then at the same time, this is their first time for most of them having access to technology in their houses. So learning how to even just open up the internet browser has been a learning experience for all of them. And we really had to just guide them through step by step what they need to do. But like I said, they're learning it very quickly. And I think that holding them to really high expectations for just this is what it is, and this is the technology that you need to use, is helping to bridge that equity gap. Because I think when I was in college, they talked about how the students who are disadvantaged compared to the other students that are receiving what they need to succeed in school need to be working 3 times as hard as their peers so that they can catch up to where they need to be. And so even though it's not ideal to be doing what we're doing right now, I think that it's a great opportunity for students to be learning just how to navigate technology issues and navigate technology in general, even with those limitations that we're facing. Yeah.
So moving on there, so Nicholas, I know you mentioned SEL, just in case everyone listening doesn't really know, we see basically so far that communities of color and poorer communities are definitely much more affected by COVID, not just in terms of technology, but also in the rates of dealing with trauma from COVID, having people around them die from COVID. So can you tell us first what SEL is and what you think why this is so important for this particular target group.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the best way to describe SEL, and really quick before I do that, like SEL is the buzzword in education. It is the thing, like I think there's moments in my educational career where I started and it was like No Child Left Behind, and that was My Brother's Keeper. And like, there's these words and terminology. And so SEL, the best way to describe it is what we used to call as growing up soft skills. So if your parent said, yeah, he's not really, great at the comprehension part, but man, he's really in tune with and can advocate for himself when he needs help. Like those are the things that SEL is about. Castle is a program that started over 25 years ago when SEL was a thing that all good schools did, but didn't really name it as SEL, right? So any school that you'll walk into in the last 20 years, if they're worth their weight and if they're giving really great access for all kids, especially our, lower socioeconomic students and students of color, they would have this feeling when you walk in that they are focused on not only the academic growth, but their emotional and their social growth as well. There's 5 components, not to bog down, but there's essentially a wheel. It's kind of formulated under like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So it kind of is predicated on, without the basics, you can't get to self-actualization. So, Brittany is a first-year teacher, and she's in a district that, has a lot of struggles with trauma, a lot of struggles with, all the things that come that we know with low socioeconomic status. My background, I've done 17 years, all urban, all, West Philly, North Philly, Stop 6 in Dallas and Fort Worth. So I've only worked in Title I schools. And so kind of to tie SEL into why this is important is that these soft skills are actually hard skills, right? We call them soft skills, but I've met a lot of CEOs that are really great and CFOs that can balance an account, but they don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to make people feel heard, and they don't know how to be vulnerable in a meaningful way. So I think one of the things that we need to do is kind of reshape this, because I think that we talk a lot about grit when it comes to, and I personally really despise the word grit because it's always a backward comment to, usually low socioeconomic students, where it's, you have grit because you live in Philly and you take the subway and you travel through bad neighborhoods, and like you should be able to do your homework. And that's really not what SEL is about. But what SEL taps into is this idea that if you know yourself, and if you can advocate for yourself, and if you can work on yourself as a whole child, right? So SEL is about discovering the whole child, that just because you may struggle in math doesn't mean that you're not going to be really successful and could be an engineer. It doesn't, but the soft skills, or now we're calling them like the hard skills, is going to help you to matriculate through high school, matriculate through college, and matriculate and have really positive relationships. We talked a little bit, all of us are, most of us here are parents or soon-to-be parents or married or whatever, but we're all in relationships regardless, right, in our roles. And so relationships are king and queen, not to disparage against gender. They're important. They're everything. And so what SEL hopefully does for our kids is give them a leg up, where it's saying, okay, you can be adaptable. You can work in any realm, and you can really push through, and not just focus on your deficit of maybe a reading ability or something else, but you can really see the strength that you have as just being a really good human being and working on that side of you as well.
Great, thank you. And Crystal, obviously teachers are going through more changes in the 6 months than probably in decades combined. What, in terms of teacher burnout, are the school districts doing, and what steps are you taking to sort of help with that?
Well, that's the $1 million question, right? So I'll say it kind of combined Nicholas and Brittany's answer, right? Because remember that teachers are people, right? They need social emotional learning skills. And so at this time, we talk a lot about social emotional learning skills, and they're especially needed in areas where there's trauma. So we tend to go in the urban districts, we go into the high need areas. But our teachers now are experiencing some serious trauma, some which it is bringing back some horrible times from their own childhood, right, when things were unpredictable for themselves, and others, it's the first time they've ever dealt with it. And it's funny you say grit, because you can kind of tell which teachers have dealt with resiliency before There's a lot to have learned through resiliency. And then there are some teachers that are really struggling, probably for the first time, not just at work, but in their lives. And at the same time, in a district, I'm in Duncanville ISD, and we're about 50% Latinx and 40% African American. So a real divide there. And we have a lot of teachers. We have a lot of African-American teachers who are also dealing with the trauma of everything that happened over the summer and just all of the racial conversations that are going on. So you're dealing with this, this personal, very, very personal situation at the same time that you're also trying to deal with what's going on at the schools. So I say that to say that a lot of the leadership we've been doing in our district, I know I've talked to other leaders in other districts, it's really pushing out that SEL for the teachers, right? So what are you doing as a principal? I had one-on-ones with about 12 of our principals over the last couple of weeks to look at our progress on our campus improvement plans. And one thing in there was about SEL for teachers. And so I just asked them, so what are you doing? Because we can't necessarily give them more time. And unfortunately, we can't give them a whole lot more money. Many of us are doing stipend. We did give like a $2,000 one-time stipend this month to try to help some, right? But that doesn't really change the landscape very much for them. And so talking with principals, there are great things a lot of them are doing. It may be calming rooms. Some of them have made calming rooms on their campus, right, with some calming music. And we've done some online calming rooms, taking treats to them, reminding them of, how great and what they're doing. But at the same time, trying to navigate you've got a twofold as a leader. You need your teachers to feel comfortable and safe, but we're in a pandemic. So every time they hear that there's another COVID case, the fear rises. And so it becomes this like juggling act of trying to figure out I want to understand where you're coming from and I want to empathize with you, but I have to have bodies here if we're going to have teachers teaching, right? So it's finding that fine line. And honestly, I was in a board meeting for the district I live in last night, and the superintendent made the comment that we've asked the teachers, what if we did half days and the kids left so we could give you half a day to plan? And the teachers said, no, because my kids are already so far behind. So then you've got these teachers who are struggling with, I can't do it all, but I'm going to really try. I've seen teachers at football games, soccer games for their own kids on their computers working it. And then the last piece of that is just like, you talked about earlier about parents and families not knowing how to use devices. We had some that brought them back because they didn't work. They did. They just didn't know how to turn them on. Really, it was sad. And then, we were giving Chromebooks to 4-year-olds who only know how to use smartphones because we don't even have Chromebooks in our classroom. So we had to switch that and get some iPads, which are much more expensive. But we have adults who remind me of 7th graders who say they're bad at math. They're not going to try it because I'm bad at math. They're like, I don't know technology. And so you're like, oh, let me just show you. But they already are so far up here that they don't know it. So one thing that we're trying to do is streamline things, right? But at the same time, you've got all these vendors, try my program. But I'm telling you right now, the best thing to do is we can't bring a bunch of brand new programs in because that's going to stress the teachers out too. So it's trying to find that fine line. But I think the biggest thing is really upon that building leader. The principals, those APs, those counselors to really, it's like getting your team going, right? It's a constant rah, we can do this kind of thing. And so every district's kind of handling it different, but even though COVID's a great leveler, no two districts are the same. I'm in a high needs district that I work in, and our parents don't get mad when we send their kids home. They're working with us. Everybody's wearing their mask. I live in an area with quite honestly, just too much privilege. They don't want to wear the masks. And then they're yelling, no, you can't make my kids stay home. So we almost have this switch of some things that are a little bit different than what we've normally dealt with.
So Andrew, from the state level perspective, what are the limitations of equitable access to education in the current environment? And what are the best initiatives that you're seeing to address some of these limitations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I'm just like my mind and my heart is racing right now just off of what Dr. Rentz was talking about. There's this piece here that's so important of we gotta look out for our people. We gotta make sure that like Maslow's needs are being taken care of. At the same time, all of us are here because we want kids to succeed. And there are so many things that go into that equation that it's not just it's not just a linear equation. It's just like all the different pieces that folks need to be worrying about right now that, again, like Dr. Rentz said, it's also different depending on where you are in the state or where you are in the country. To answer the question, so from a state perspective, so again, 1,200 school districts across the state of Texas, everywhere from Uplift to Duncanville to Tulia ISD up in the Panhandle to Cisco ISD out in Eastland County, that are just absolutely different places. You have the El Paso area that is a hotbed for COVID right now. You also have some areas, outside of Abilene that are like they still haven't had any cases, and so it's about this idea of equity when you put that on top of this, like the inherent differences across our state and inherent differences of how different folks are experiencing this situation. It's a very complex issue, and so I think as a state, our role is to work to be as responsive as possible to the needs that folks at large are having, with an extra focus on the students that need us most, and then the schools that are serving those students that need us the most. So I think there is also to take it back to another hierarchy here, is there's a level of support that we can give around safety, which we've done through a lot of our work with personal protective equipment, with testing that we're doing right now to make sure that the folks that need that stuff can get access to it. Thinking about a level up when it goes to connectivity and hardware and infrastructure, different initiatives that we've been fortunate enough to have great partners a lot in the Dallas area to push through Operation Connectivity and make sure that folks have the ability to be connected, whether that's through fiber, Wi-Fi, fiber, broadband access, whether that's through actually having the devices to get you there. And then I guess to go one level up on that hierarchy, there's also, okay, now that you have the technology, what do you do with it? So making sure that folks are actually using technology, using programs in a way that are going to meet the needs of kids. I think the problem here, and where you get, so that stuff is easy, actually, I would say, like deploying resources is something that you can do. You can say, here is a subset of districts that really need this stuff. We're going to send these computers to that district. What is a lot more hard and a lot more nuanced, and this is a lot of the responsibility of us as education leaders in this room, is to think about the people that are there. Dr. Rentz brought up a great point of we have a ton of Chromebooks. These folks don't know how to use Chromebooks. How can we be flexible? How can we be responsive? How can we be nimble to ensure that the outcome still happens, even though kind of what we put in the path there doesn't? So does that mean we train folks up on Chromebooks? Does that mean we just replace with iPads? There's cost considerations there. So I say all these things to say, I think that there's a lot that folks are doing. There's a lot that we're doing, putting out there, but I think that the biggest thing that I think that we can be doing better is to equip our local districts with the resources that they need in order to make those decisions that are based on the unique situation that they face. Again, like, I think we can deploy resources, but if we believe that a standardized set of resources is going to equip 5.4 million students across the state with what they need, we're being naive, and it's going to actually lead to increases in inequity, and so it requires us to have this equity mindset as we think about not just deploying resources, but how we think about enabling systems and structures to enable people to do things for kids.
Great, thank you, Nicolina. How does Google see its role in creating equitable access to education? What tools or initiatives does Google have to address the extra challenges faced by the economically disadvantaged students and those parents who don't have what we were discussing here a second ago, don't have the economic, technology, or language skills even to act as an additional resource for their kids? Basically, it's the kids having to figure it out themselves, how to use the technology.
Yeah. First, I just want to say this is a great question, and I'm glad you posed it. I think that, what you're speaking to covers a lot of what others have said. And this question, we've wrestled with this for years. But of course, today, more than ever, when we're seeing exactly to what you've said, is that students are learning at home without a teacher physically present to support them along the way, should they need that motivation or support, oftentimes without reliable internet or resources and other distractions at home. We see it, we feel it ourselves, and these students are, 6 years old or 10 years old. To answer this, at a high level, Google we see our role in addressing this issue of equitable access as one that requires a multitude of resources, which is something that Google does have. And it's, being very targeted about that. So what does that mean? It's across our products, it's across our programs, it's across the philanthropy arm of our organization, and it's across our people and really our partners. So just to break this down a bit, and I'm going to speak a little bit to what others have said too, because I think there's so much overlap here. On the product side of the house, kind of to start with, something, Brittany, you spoke to already, is that connectivity. And so first and foremost, within our products, we want to make sure that our tools are working offline as well as online. And this is, as I know you all are aware of, they'll account for intermittent connectivity, ensuring that learning can still happen. And even if students don't have Wi-Fi access or access on, at certain hours of the day, making sure that, for example, within our tools, they're still able to edit, save, work on their homework assignments as such. This also, there was the mention of Chromebooks, making sure that students, if they need to, say, record videos or screencasts for particular assignments, they can do that as well. One of the products that I'm actually most excited about to address this question of equity is a new Android app that we recently had a launch for called Read Along. And it's an Android app that helps young students learn to read and works completely offline. I think the unique thing about this, and this is what excites me about this product in particular, we actually built it and launched it in India. And so it was for a market and tailored to a market and a population experiencing many of the challenges that our most economically depraved communities right here in the States also face. We accelerated the launch of this and now rolled it out to 180 countries across 9 languages, including the US, for English, Spanish, and a few other languages as well. And so when I think about kind of that student who can't read, who doesn't have the parent at home, who's equipped to help them build up these literacy skills, Read Along is one of the products that makes me most excited. There's a lot more that we need to do on this front. And I think one of the learnings we've taken away from this is that building our products, kind of applying our skill sets there with the lens that we truly need to tailor to a specific market, is one of the things that we want to continue to build on. Now, I spoke to products. Even if we launch products, Andrew, you said that's nice. Whether or not we're excited about them, it doesn't really matter. If someone can't access it, if someone doesn't know how to use it, if we give out a Chromebook and they don't know how to turn it on, it's not going to be useful to anyone. And so we, look at this feed. We take a hard look at the customer feedback. And one of the things that we've got is we launched a Teach for Anywhere initiative, which is basically a hub of resources and tools, trainings for teachers, students, and parents alike. We did launch this at the beginning of COVID. And one of the interesting insights I recall is, we used to have a training that was, level 1, level 2, level 3 for, how you would progress, or how we thought someone would progress down the path of using our products. The realization is that, in an era when education technology is not a nice to have and used by those who want to venture into the world of EdTech, now it's a need to have. And so people are forced to. Our trainings then became internally, not externally, was, all right, we've got 1, 2, 3, now we have 0, now we have -1, -2. Like, where do we start? To say, okay, how do you turn on the Chromebook? Just really getting to the basics. So some of our initiatives have really centered around that, is how do we really start with the users who, are fearful of the technology up front. Now, there's also the recognition that, solving issues of equity and equitable access, this is not something that we're going to pretend to do alone. So, our products might be great. We can build programs, but Google is not going to solve this alone. And we don't have the insights nor the reach to do that. And so, we continue to look to other organizations, other partners that we can support. On the philanthropic side of the house, we have a distance learning fund, which we directed money towards to help organizations to support educators, particularly in underserved communities. And so we certainly, look at our role in part as we have google.org and that philanthropic arm to support those partners, as well as the fact that, we have partners across states, across other companies. And so just, that they touch and reach local communities in ways that we don't. Just a couple examples of this. We partnered with the state of California and T-Mobile to provide Chromebooks as well as 10,000 hotspots. And so really kind of addressing, again, as we've spoken to, that question of internet connectivity and devices. And other examples that we've seen of this, and this is where we can leverage our global scale and reach, as I mentioned with the Read Along app, really to bring it back home and to say, okay, what can we do to support our communities here? We had a partnership in Japan where it was essentially a device lending program for schools. And so we've partnered closely with them around that. And the impact of that has been incredible. The partners on the ground there have been able to benefit from our devices. But what we recognize is that, we need to make sure that we can enable them and provide them the tools and the trainings to be able to do that. So I think in summary, we see our role in a number of capacities. We also recognize that we haven't cracked this nut yet entirely, and there's a lot more that we can and should be doing. And so we're continuing to kind of build on this. I even look at kind of this panel here, and we listen to our customers on a daily basis, but do we always come together and have a kind of a cross-functional group, whispering in our ear? Not on a daily basis. And so there's more of that we can do.
That brought up a little bit this, which isn't one of the questions I've had listed here before, but the parent understanding part of it, I think has been a thread that's been going through what all of you have said. And Brittany, if you could say, I know that when you started this year, you actually made appointments with each of the parents and taught them the technology first, which I think is a unique thing in your your orientation for the course. And obviously not all of them get it, and then you still have things, but instead of just a list of instructions, actually spent the time on a call saying, okay, then we click this and then we click this. And I'm sure the students ultimately were a lot easier to teach than the parents, but I know that that's sort of a part of the hurdle. If you could talk about that a little bit as well, and it'd be great.
Yeah, so I did. My school asked us to do that in the beginning of the school year, to meet with all of the parents, but I thought it was a good opportunity to just walk them through all of the EdTech, and then it led to 45-minute Zoom calls with each parent going okay, this is how we sign up for Google Classroom, this is how we send an email and all that. So, it helped me to get a lot of my parents involved and connected. And after that initial teaching the parents, this is exactly what your child is going to be on, and this is what they're going to do with it. I felt comfortable in saying from that point on, parents know, and now the learned helplessness on the kids' part is not acceptable anymore. So we went straight into here's the technology that you're using. This is exactly how you use it as a 9-year-old, and you're going to figure out how to use it because that's all we got right now. And then through that, I've noticed that my students are able to pick up what they need to do with the technology the second that I'm okay, I can't help you with it anymore, it's all you. Once they struggle a little bit with it, they're okay, I can do this. And then I've noticed that the parents' concerns are being answered by my students, who are oh, no, Mom, this is how we do it, which is really great, because I think it's a good way to just, I don't know, there's a really strange I guess, approach that people have with technology. So there is like this big learned helplessness. And I've seen that with parents, I've seen it with students, and I've seen it with other teachers at my campus, where it's like, okay, we're using this website, but I don't know how to use it, so I'm just not going to do it. And I think that honestly, just kind of forcing them into using it and saying like, no, there's no other option, this is what we're doing, has helped overcome that. And I don't think I intentionally did that. I think it's when I was an undergrad, like I had classes centered around, this is how you create a Google Classroom, this is how you do it effectively. And like everything that we were doing was on Google. So coming into my classroom and knowing that it was going to be virtual, I just kind of assumed that everything was going to be the same. But coming from like a very privileged educational background where like we all had Chromebooks, we used them, we did all of that for 18 years basically, and then coming into a low-income school where students didn't know how to turn on their Chromebooks was just really fascinating for me to navigate. But I just think that productive struggles help with learning what they need to learn. And so just really embracing the technology is important right now.
Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, obviously this shift towards EdTech has happened very suddenly, much more so than anyone has expected. It's something, though, that in the U.S. needs to happen anyway. It's just sort of being done in crisis mode and accelerating it. So you're getting probably a lot of learning gaps and other things, but the benefit of actually having kids who normally wouldn't have a Chromebook or any kind of technology, actually learning to use that, which is definitely a skill that's needed in the workplace, must have some benefits in and of itself, even if some of the other skills might be falling behind on that. So a general question to all the panelists here on these changes, the changes that are happening now with educational technology, the structuring of how schools are going. Do you see this? What do you see as the long-term impact of this on education? Are we sort of will this have meant that we finally sort of really made the leap in all levels of education to really integrating EdTech, or is this going to be, thank goodness, when COVID is over, now we're back to normal, put all the technology away and let's go back to what we were doing, what we were comfortable with? And whoever would like to start, Crystal, maybe you'd like to start with that one.
Well, I think the big thing about it is a bunch has been thrown at the districts and at the campuses and at the teachers. This is all free. And so I think that's been the hardest part for parents. If I've got 4 kids at 4 different grade levels and all these teachers are using all these free things, so now I've got to figure out how to do 95 apps and have a free account for them, right? It makes me think of when I taught newcomers. I was an ESL teacher and I had newcomers, and they're learning the language. We don't need to do 85 different strategies. It was like 4. So they knew those were the 4 we were going to do. And so they didn't have to spend all the time trying to understand the actual activity, but they could work on the language. Same thing with the technology. We're spending a lot of time trying to understand the technology. I'm not sure how much of the instruction. So I think there can be some great things had, but I think it's on the technology companies and Google has already figured it out. That's why they platformed everything together, right? So when you go into this item, it looks similar to this, so that you can use all those pieces. So I think that this can be a great stepping stone, but I think it's going to have to be done with strategy, right? So districts are going to have to say, these are the things that we need. And remember, that one mom may have 4 kids with all these different platforms because you decided pre-K should use this, 2nd grade should use this, 6th grade should use this, and the senior should use this. So that becomes a very difficult way. So more is not better. So I think it can be great. It's just going to have to be very much streamlined and to make sense. And it needs to make sense for your district, because no 2 districts are the same. What they need in Dallas is not what we need in Duncanville, even though part of our district's actually in the city of Dallas. They're 2 different things. So that's what I would say to that. It could be a wonderful thing, but it could also be a nightmare if we don't do it right.
Yeah, I think
Andrew. Okay, Nicholas, go ahead. You started. Go ahead. I was just going to pick someone. Okay. You can do next. Go ahead.
I think Dr. Entz, you bring up a great point. I think there's also, not every EdTech program is created equal. Not every principal is created equal in the sense that I think that to piggyback, it is literally about strategy and processes and systems colliding with people that get it, that have compassion, that love their kids enough to say, listen, we're going to work through this together. You know, Brittany is over at our campus at Triumph. It's an amazing, one of my favorite, you know, campuses that we have, and they have a really strong community sense. You know, we need to partner with parents better in education. That is something that can be said in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley, in, you know, Queens, and all over the country. We are leaving people out of the puzzle, and that is happening through a lot of different reasons, but a lot of microaggressions and assumptions when it comes to equity issues in low-income school districts, right? So people are assuming, there's this thought like, well, they probably don't know how to do this because, you know, this is their poverty line, or, you know, their parents didn't go to college, or so. I think that there's, to make this shift, and to come back to the question, I do think that we all knew that education needed to be blown up, right? We knew that what was working in education that was built in this kind of agricultural society of, like, you know, having summers off because of the harvest and all these things, we needed to blow it up. But, you know, it has been a trial by fire. And I think that, you know, with this learning, we need to build capacity in leaders and teacher leaders. You know, I think as a former principal, I think the reason why I left the classroom is because I saw the need to have strong leadership that I didn't really feel in the schools that I worked in. And instead of complaining about and not being happy with it, I said, listen, let me go back and get my degree and work through it and try to be really great at this. And, you know, there was millions of mistakes made. And there were days when I was great and there was days when I wasn't. But I think that it comes down to people. It always comes down to people. And that's a big social emotional learning premise, right? Is that, yes, Google is incredible. It's a top 5 company and they have incredible software. But even Nicolina said, it's not, they can't solve it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's everyone collaborating together, trying to understand each other, putting their pride aside, right? Understanding that it's okay to say that Duncanville needs something different from Dallas, and that New York City needs something different from the rural parts of Iowa, and saying, how do we do this together? So I think that it's going to take people dropping their ego from superintendents on down, because those who are affected are people like Brittany, they're doing the work. Brittany's the only one on this call that's really doing it. We are supporting, we are servants to Brittany. And so, you know, all the teachers here on this call, like, thank you for what you're doing, because you are the frontline workers. We are, you know, we're not that anymore. We were at one point, we are not that. So
in this, based on the comment of sort of collaboration, it reminded me of in Finland, in Helsinki, the city of Helsinki actually got all the parties together, basically their school districts and teachers, and from all levels sort of approached it and said, what do we need? What type of technology? Not looking at specific technology and trying to fit that into what you're doing, but saying, this is what we have, specifically what we have issues. And in those discussions, they kind of came up with, here's what we need, and basically put that out to EdTech companies to create those things, instead of the EdTech companies creating them and then trying to figure out how to implement them in some way. They said, here are our actual needs, these specific things. And that involves a lot of collaboration that kind of comes from the different direction. It comes from the schools on up. And it's something that I think actually is a great model. And I think it worked really well for what they were doing. And any comments based on that, or anything about how collaboration could be working better? Also understanding that each district is different, because that is something that could even be done district by district, but sort of in the larger picture, maybe Andrew, you can answer it as sort of Texas-wide, how that would be something that we could do.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have, I don't have the answers. I think the answer is always like, talk to your user as much as possible and figure out what they need and what's holding them back, and then try to deliver that as much as you can. To call out, I think, 3 things from what Dr. Rentz and Nicholas, what y'all were talking about, I heard, and they're aligned with, I think, how we're trying to deliver some initiatives, at least at the state. But I hear like strategy is number 1. And it's like this idea of, if you're going to deploy technology, like, have a strategy, have a plan for it, like have like a pain point that you're trying to solve with it, rather than just say like, here's the technology, go. 2020, nobody had a strategy for 2020 because nobody knew that it was going to come on like that, right? So I think there's initiatives that we have, like one that's in our group called Math Innovation Zones and Uplift. Y'all are a part of it. In Duncanville, y'all were a part of the ideation of it 3 years ago. Like, we actually fund districts to go through a year-long planning process before, and then ultimately work towards like a codified planning process to ultimately get approval, and then deploy the technology, then throw it into the classrooms, and then use it, and then learn, and then get better, right? And so like this strategic planning process and building in time for people to get better, people to like use the technology better and learn why they're using the technology, I think is critical. The other thing I heard was process. And I think that like this is I think process is the like key to how you scale quality within education. I think that there's like, it's hard because we have such unique circumstances. Like Duncanville, you're very different than like Red Oak. You're very different than Dallas. You're very different than Uplift, right? So, but like at the core, like, you know that like kids need to have access to devices, software, and data-driven instruction programs. Like, what is that process going to look like for y'all? Great, let's codify that, and then let's move forward, and let's continuously improve that across the time. I think those are two big pieces. And the last thing I heard was people. I think, you know, as we sit in Global Entrepreneurship Week and think about EdTech, so like a lot of times, and even as educators, we get super excited about like something that we created, something that we have delivered, like something that like a lesson that we developed, right? When it's actually, it's not about what we did. It's about like, how's the student going to receive it? Or like from our perspective as a state, how's the district going to receive it? Like, is it actually fulfilling their needs? And so that like relentless focus on people and understanding that people ultimately are the end user of technology in schools is something that like it's simple, but it's so critical to how we deploy it.
Yeah, I'd like to actually piggyback off of that, Andrew, and a couple notes. One, you know, the point that there are people using our products, and having been a teacher in the classroom and having been frustrated with how the technology that I was handed was not built for me as an educator, and I was meant to just sit and watch my students watch a video. That was my whole inspiration getting into EdTech as a whole. But kind of backing up a bit, I think as a whole we need to recognize, and I came from actually a smaller EdTech startup, where really on a day-to-day we were competing with Classroom and saying, all right, how do we, meet head-to-head or compare against Google Classroom? And the challenge with that is that when you get EdTech companies that are competing, because there is, an emphasis on the bottom line and the number of people using a product to be able to, toot your own horn. The challenge with that is that you're then kind of distracting the people who you're ultimately trying to serve. And so this is something that on a day-to-day is a struggle. It's easier at a place like Google, where we can say we can find ways to connect with other tools, to connect with LMSs, so that it is a more seamless experience, and that kind of distraction across 7 different tools to track your attendance, to track to make sure students are paying attention, to make sure kind of grades are being submitted, that you're not distracted by 7 tools, and that is a more seamless experience. But I think the collaboration not only has to happen on the end of say districts and teachers together building a process to say this is what we want, but it's also on the other side companies to say, all right, rather than and we're never going to get away from companies, for-profit companies, saying this is what we we need to look at the bottom line, but it is saying, how do we go about this better together so that we're actually providing kind of meaningful support and actually serving our the populations that need this most, rather than distracting. So I think I took off my Google hat a little bit in saying some of that, but that's okay.
This is the money symbol. Is that what it is? Takes money for all. Is that what both Andrew and Nicholas are doing? That
we do the stats at
money.
That's it.
Oh, it's a clap. Oh, okay.
We can
show love.
Yeah,
That's
The jazz hand.
Got it.
You can just do that for the next 3 minutes.
Got it.
Just show love right there.
Our time is up. Just as a final yes or no, what is your opinion? Do you think that this quick shift, obviously COVID is bad, do you think this is ultimately going to end up being a positive thing for education, this crash course in EdTech? We'll just go in order. Nicolina.
I will say yes, with the condition that we have exactly what Nicholas, you started saying, is with process and strategy. So absolutely yes, with process and strategy.
Okay. Andrew?
I mean, it's not black and white, right? Sorry. I know it's a yes or no question, but it's not a yes or no answer.
Okay. Some positives,
Absolutely.
some negatives.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a ton of positives.
Okay.
Yeah, the eternal optimist in me, and going back to why I chose to go the SEL route. I just believe that, we can do this together. We touched upon, it's not just COVID, right? There's the racial injustice. Our country is more divided than it's ever been, and everybody on this call, I'm sure, that's something we can all agree on, whatever political affiliation you are. So we got to get back to, caring about people, and caring about our people is caring about our young people, because they are the future. And so I say, yes, we will grow. But with that, there are going to be some cuts and bruises along the way, but that'll make us more resilient. And, I think about these young people who are going to say, I grew up in 2020 and I didn't have a senior year, and what stories they're going to tell. And I think, honestly, ultimately, they're going to be better for it. That's at least my hope, so.
Great. Brittany?
I would like to say yes. I'm very hopeful that the answer is yes. At the same time, right now, I just think it's a really critical time. So how teachers respond, how students and families respond, how the higher ups respond is ultimately going to decide whether or not this time is going to change education and make it more equitable, and just emphasize access to technology and the importance of equity. And like Nicholas said, I think that really comes from just compassion and empathy, and understanding the individual circumstances that different families and different districts are coming from, and being able to support individually. Like we talk about differentiating our instruction, we need to differentiate the support that we're providing to our students. And that equity is coming, hopefully.
Crystal?
So I've been saying since day one, because I'm about a growth mindset, that my hope is that 2020 does provide exactly that, 2020, some perspective. I think that there are people who have been privileged and don't realize it, but now do, because this was, like we've said, it's kind of been the great leveler. And in some senses, people that have never dealt with that are seeing things from a new lens. And it's also getting people who, I hate to say it, but are typically heard, speaking out for equity. Mm-hmm. So that's where I believe that growth mindset is that, yes, and no great change ever came without a huge amount of conflict. And so my growth mindset says, yes, it's going to get better. So we're just going to have to keep preaching that. So.
Great. All right. Thank you all so much for participating. It's been a great conversation. Wish we could have a longer one, but I think we covered a lot of the highlights, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlotte, for bringing us together.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.